Hi everyone, my name is Couty, Sabah. I am a social worker. I am from the Israeli Ministry of Social Affairs, wherein I am in charge of research, planning and training. And I am very happy to be here with you. I want to thank you for the invitation. It's my third time here. This cooperation started, in fact, 7 years ago, when the Israeli government, the Israeli cabinet, came to Prague and met with the Czech government. It was called G2G, government to government. There was a meeting there, and one of the resolutions was that we have to work together. And at that time, we proposed a subject of cooperation between the two ministries. It was the issue of measurement of outcomes in social work. And it was agreed, and since then we have done 2 workshops on that subject here. And I'm happy to be here again and to talk with you again. It is always a real pleasure to come here to your country, and I'm very happy to be here. I am going to talk about regulation in Israel, and I will try to make it as relevant to your experience as possible. My story, what I'm going to talk to you about is about Israel and the specific conditions we share in our country. And I do hope that I will be able to talk to you about our experience in the sense or in the way that we make things relevant to what you are doing here in the Czech Republic. As my colleague told you, the Israeli social work scene is under different pressures and under different influences. And we have done a long way since we have started. And I want to stress that a little because regulations depend on what kind of social welfare regime you have. And first I want to talk you short about the regime of Israel, and then to move as quickly as possible to talk to you about regulation and its challenges. Traditionally, 1932 is the year when we talk about the beginning of social work in Israel. At that time, Palestine at that time is under British mandate, British rulers. But the social issues are left to the communities, to the Jewish and to the Arab communities. And in 1932, the Jewish establishment started, for the first time, established a social work department and started the first training in social work in the country. And from there, until the establishment of the state in 1948, and after that, we are under a very strong socialist, collectivist, nation-building kind of orientation. And because of that, even that tremendous security and all the pressure, we managed to set, during the first decade of the country, we managed to have, as Neri said before, we managed to have a welfare state in a more British way. Between 1948 and 1958, the first 10 years, we managed to enact 3 main laws in terms of social security, education, and welfare. And this orientation is going to change along the years. In 1977, the right-wing party will come to power, and a strong change in terms of economic policy will start. We'll have a lot of privatization. And this will be, we'll move from a collectivist, socialist orientation toward a new neoliberal kind of regime in Israel. And maybe the main event that I want to mention is that context is the 1992 Mandatory Tenders Act, meaning that every government, when buying any kind of services, has to go through a very systematic, formal tendering process. And this means that we're moving for a more socialistic again, way of procurement to commodification of social services, to the marketization of social work in Israel. And this is something that we are going to go through. And to give you an example to what does that mean, I want to show you two graphs. Okay, this is, for example, what is occurring in Israel in terms of budget of my ministry since 2005. Okay, as you see, the green line is a budget line. So we have a lot of increase in the budget of the ministry, about 92% in 10 years. At the same time, the population that we have, our clientele in the ministry, growth was only about 13 to 16%. So it's a huge amount of money coming into the social services instead of the more neoliberal regime that we are having in Israel. To give you another idea, this is the social expenditures in terms of GDP. Here the picture we got is totally different. So we have, in terms of how much we spend on social services and all the social expenditure in terms of part of the GDP, we are very stable. So meaning we are spending more money because we have more money in the economy. So the ideology is not changing so much. We are ready to give about the same share of our economy, of our product, to social services. But since the Israeli economy is booming, we are able to enlarge our social services. And this is what often is called, before that, the third graph I want to show you is that what's happened, so what do we do with that money? And what you can learn from that is that we are moving more and more to buy social services from out of the government providers. So there is a process of marketization, of commodification of social services. We are not doing social services by ourselves. We are buying them from outside the provider. In terms of the last 15 years, for example, we have moved from 70 to about more than 80% of what we do, of our budget is spent by the ministry buying services from outside providers. Some of them are for-profit firms, and some of them are non-for-profit. Also, in fact, the way they behave is quite similar. Those are non-profit organizations, but in fact, they behave in a very economic way, like for-profit organizations. So we are buying our services. That's the idea. If we are buying our services, it is very different what we have in the beginning. At the beginning of the social work in Israel, social work was done by the government or by real advocacy groups and by a non-for-profit organization, and regulation was not critical. Because now that we are buying services, regulation has become a very important issue in the way we do our work, and that's why I want to talk to you today about the way we do regulation. So basically, the last opening remark is about to give you an idea about what we do in the ministry. What we do is under that we are using market means to achieve welfare ends. And we have a very large area of services that we offer. Personal social services in Israel include a range of services which aim to help individuals, family, groups, and communities at least to overcome their problems and improve their integration into society. The services include both community-based and residential services. We as a ministry are in charge of most of these services, but through policy making, financing, standard setting and inspection, but not by direct provision. The municipalities play a significant role alongside with non-profit and non-profit providers. So that's about what I wanted to say as opening remarks. We do a lot of work, we have a lot of budget the last decade, but we do that through other providers, and we have to regulate the work and to overcome that work. And now the main part of my talk is about what are the challenges we are facing when doing regulation of our welfare state, when regulations mean in that context, it means standard setting, it means monitoring, and it means enforcement. So the government has to set the standards, what is to be done, it has to monitor if what's to be done is indeed done, and in case it is not the case, what do we do to enforce the standards that were set? In that context, we are facing multiple challenges, and I want to talk with them more bluntly. The first of one is the issue of heterogeneity of clients. Standard setting infers uniformity. You want to set one rule for all. You want to have one standard for everyone. But the Israeli society is extremely heterogeneous. We have 20% Arabs. We have about 10% Ultra-Orthodox. We have immigrants from everywhere, as you understand. My ancestry are from Morocco. My friend is from here. And Talia, ancestors are from Tunisia and Yemen. Okay? We are from everywhere. We have an extremely diverse society. And in terms of social work, it means that an intervention that works with one person will not work with somebody else. For example, if you have an issue of domestic violence, in some sector of the community, you can do traditional Western work. In other parts, if you intervene into the family, the woman is in danger. She will be killed for complaining about the domestic violence in the family. So you cannot set standards that will work for everyone. That's one issue of challenging. Then one challenge is of regulation. The other one is it is in fact extremely difficult to set standards that are good enough so we can use them for contracting out our services. For example, do we mean to set standards that are around inputs, what you have to do as a social worker, or do you have to set standards about what you have to achieve as a social worker? Are the standards about inputs, throughput, processes, or are they about outputs? For example, if you are talking about residential care for people with addiction, do you want to supervise the way they take care of the guys that are there? Or do you want to overcome this only to see if, after a period of time, they are without addiction? That's very important, very different. It's very difficult in social work when we are dealing with people to set clear standards and to adopt a marketization approach. Third problem, we have a diversity of providers. Some of the services are given directly by the government, a small part of them, but still. We have some of them are done by regional government, by municipalities. Some of them by for-profit, some of them by advocacy groups. How do you deal with such a different market in terms of setting standards and monitoring? The fourth issue I want to raise on that is the issue of street-level discretion. We are talking with social workers. They are supposed to do professional work. They have, by definition, a larger discretion. They have to make decisions. You cannot translate every complexity of the situation the social worker is facing. You cannot translate it into rules and protocols. You need to leave a lot of discretion to the people that are making the decision. You cannot have, for example, to give you an example, many countries have tried to regulate child protection work and to set clear rules and clear procedures about how to do that kind of work in order to avoid mistakes. Because if there is a mistake, there is a felicity, there is a child that is going to be killed by parents. So how do you overcome that? But very clearly everybody knows now that you cannot replace discretion by clear regulation. So there is a lot of street-level discretion by the field. You cannot take an algorithm instead of the meeting of the social worker with the child and the family. So how do you regulate that? The fifth issue we are taking is that the fact that social workers, in spite of the fact that we are spending a lot of time in training them into research, and Talia is going to talk about that, still there is a deep aversion toward measurement. measurement is considered to be something mechanistic, not humanistic. So people don't like to be measured on that. They say that as we say in Hebrew, every person is a full word. So everybody is different. So you cannot measure. And social workers don't like to be part of this kind of system, and to be measured and regulated. Besides that, we as ministers feel what we call regulatory loneliness, meaning that in other fields of social services, for example in education or in health, the regulator is not alone. Parents are there, advocacy groups are there, people that are the service receiver are there. People can say what they want to say, and if they are not happy with the service, they can say that bluntly and openly. When we are talking about people with disabilities, with mental problems, with a poor person, with homeless persons, very often nobody is there to talk for them. So all the job of regulating the service and to guarantee that the service they got is good enough is on the ministry, on the inspector of the ministry. So that's what I meant by regularly loneliness, that there is no external, in many cases there is no external regulations that can help us in doing our regulatory work. On the same level, there is also what is often called in the literature a regulatory capture, meaning that in fact we don't have any effective sanctions against providers that are not doing their job well. For example, if you have a provider that is running for you a home for people with mental disabilities, and people are there for 10 years, and you're not happy anymore with the service there, you cannot take people very easily to a new place. For example, people with autism, that's a big issue to move them from one place to another. So there is de facto monopolization of the service. It's extremely difficult to take effective action against provider, and that everybody knows that in the field. So you are limited in your capacity to regulate the activity of the providers. We are also afraid of regulatory ritualism, meaning that people are doing what they are told to be done by the standard, by the regulation, by the protocols, but they do not really feel or fulfill the real spirit of what we would like to achieve. They are told to do X and Y and Z things, so they do that, but it's a more in a ritual way. They are filling the forms, they are filling the procedures, but what we really wanted to achieve is not there. That also may happen. So on the regulatory point of view, it's okay. And when you send an inspector and you have a checklist and everything is okay because the procedures are fulfilled. But in fact, the spirit of social work is not there. Something that is maybe an Israeli problem, but I think it should be mentioned, is that we have what I call the split personality. Because in some cases, the government, the for-profit sector, and the non-for-profit sector are doing the same job. For example, we have homes for people with mental retardations that are run by the government. We have some that are run by the for-profit advocacy group, for example, and parent organizations, and we have also for-profit commercial kind of services. And this makes the regulatory process more complex. For example, the guy from the outside, the people from the for-profit regulation, get very angry when they discover that we set different standards for the services that are run by the ministry and the ones that are set from outside the ministry. So that makes something different. It is not a unique phenomenon, but it is something that is worthwhile to be mentioned. And the last issue I want to mention here is the issue of what I call the paradox of privatizations. That's what I meant by that. If we are going through a process of privatization and about 85% of your budget is spent on contracting out services, you need to regulate them, you need to oversee them. In order to do that, the inspectors, social workers of the ministry have to be experts. They have to understand the field very well. They have to have a very intimate knowledge of what does it mean to run services. But since they are workers, they are on the workforce of the ministry, they are not in the field, and there is no no services run by the ministry, they are losing their capacity to oversee the services. So that's a paradox. Because of privatization, you need more knowledge, more expertise inside the ministry, but because of privatization, you are losing this expertise. And the job of inspectors is becoming more and more complex because of that. That's the challenges we are facing. Another slide about how I propose to you to look at the problem. Okay, I think we should see that as a continuum between managerialism approach and the professionalism one. Okay, and I think I believe it will be helpful in understanding the theoretical of the problem. Managerialism emphasizes uniformity, where professionalism emphasizes responsive regulation that is tailor-made to the need of the social worker, to the need of the clients, and to the specificity of each services. Managerialism and fair audit-oriented inspection. That means we are often using the metaphor of a camera. We are going to go to the service and take a snapshot of it. You don't want anything that is fluid and not exact. You want a very clear measurement of what's going on there, like an audit. Whether when you are talking about professionalism, you are talking about learning together. Which, for example, inspectors in the past were more guided and considered than pure inspector. Now they are making more inspection. Managerialism puts a lot of emphasis on use of the right use of resources. So they are checking the way they are using the money they are giving to you. If you need to have 2 social workers in place, you want to see that the 2 social workers are there. If the client has to receive X and Y and Z, you want to check that. Whether when you are more on a professional approach, you are looking at outcomes. You want to see what's really happened to the people that you are going to, that you are serving. Managers put a lot of emphasis on evidence. That's a word that, for example, in America is so much used, evidence-based practice. You have to base your practice on evidence, meaning on scientific finding of scientific research. Whether, when you are talking about profession, you know that there is a lot of practice wisdom, a lot of wisdom, of knowledge that is created in the field by social workers. And you have to give a lot of importance to that knowledge also. Managers mean protocols and checklists and verification. Whether when you are talking about professional work, you are more talking about general guidelines, orientation, discretion. Managers wish to limit discretion to the minimum. Discretion is seen as something not very good, something that may be used in a bad way. You want to tell people what exactly they have to do and to leave them very small quantity of discretion. On the professional approach, it's about more and more discretion and more structured decisions. For example, we want to tell child protection officers. On one side you say, I don't want you to make any discretion, just follow the rules. There you have to think of that and that and that. We are not going to tell you what to do, but we can tell you what to think about, what to take into account when you make your professional decisions. Managerialism is about compliance. It's about following rules, where in professionalism there is a lot of emphasis on ethical motivation. So the point of view of professionalism is that social workers are good people. They are motivated by ethics. They want to do good. They may make mistakes, but you still have to give them a lot of discretion, and they will make the right decision. The managerialism approach is totally different. We don't believe in that. We have to tell people what to do. And so the monitoring among the managerialism approach is about external monitoring. We want to send somebody from the outside to see what we are doing. And whether a more professional approach, we talk about self-monitoring. Okay, so what I would like to propose to you is to find the right middle between these two approaches. In some cases, you have to adopt a more managerial approach. And in other case, you have to be more professional. So that is what we try to do in my country, to resolve this dilemma. And to have a more tailor-made regulation of social services. First of all, we understand that not one measure fits all, not one regulation fits all. We need different regulatory systems for different services. In terms of, so we are talking about a three-stage kind of model. The first stage is to understand what kind of framework you are going to regulate. The first issue is to start to ask what is the vulnerability of the client in that framework you are going to inspect. For example, if you are talking about people with mental disabilities, older people who have nobody to oversee what's happening there, you as the ministry have to be there more present. So you are talking about the service for example, families in divorce, when people are middle class, people that can take care of themselves, that are able to ask for these services. So the vulnerability is different. And you have to spend resources and effort and regulation according to the vulnerability of the clients that are receiving services. The second issue is to what extent there is additional monitoring. Are you the only one, going back to that issue of regulatory loneliness, are you the only one present there, or is there somebody else? Is there, for example, a parents' association that is there very present, or not? And according to that, you have to tailor your regulatory system. And the third point is every provider, what is the quality of his performance in the past? Is he okay? If he's not okay? If he's not okay, you have to be more present. If you know that this guy, the provider, is a good person, he doesn't need a ministry. He's internally motivated to do the best job possible. You can lessen the quantity of regulations that they are going to do. So that's the first stage. Second stage is to remember that inspection is not the only way to regulate. Regulation is not done only by regulation. There are many ways to regulate the providers that you have contracted your services out. For example, training is a way to regulate. You can ask people to come to your training. I am in charge in my department of a huge school of social work, on-the-job training school for social work that offer more than 400 different courses every year in different fields. We can ask in the bids and in the contract with the provider to send the worker to our school. So we don't have to regulate only by coming there and see what's happened. We can ask people in and say that's the policy of the ministry. And please follow this training to know that. So training is another way to regulate. Bids are another way to regulate. You can set specific requirements in the bids that you are publishing. In that way you are telling everybody what is your policy, what you're expecting to have. And people, if the bids are built well enough, people know that if you are not doing their job in the right way, they will lose the next bid and they will be out of the market. We can set red lines, which are not very sophisticated guidelines and rules and regulations, but say those are the kind of things that we are not going to allow. We can use licensing. Every service has to get a license from the government. And this is also a way to guarantee that the service is done in the right way. And the outcome initiative, that's the subject. I was here already twice, and I have talked with your colleagues in the past. Outcome initiative means the best way to regulate, in my understanding, is not to send an inspector that you can send once every year to some place. Is to guarantee that the social workers have an inner motivation to do the best way they can do. And to do that, to my understanding, among social workers, the best way is to train them to think outcomes. Not to think about what is a problem and what is the input I have in my basket to offer, but what is the best way to help the person I'm supposed to serve. This is a long story I'm not going to answer now, but the outcome initiative for me is that's the best way to regulate. Train people to think about what they have to achieve. This is also a very important step in fighting burning out of social workers. But when you set clear outcome to yourself, outcome initiative means setting outcome for myself, not from the external inspector, but I am setting outcome I want to achieve, together with the client I'm supposed to serve. If I'm able to set outcomes, if I'm able to measure them, social workers see that they are doing a good job. They can measure that. They can feel it. And when you are feeling that you are doing a good job, burning out is down and down. And the first step in the model we are trying to implement in my country is that... 3 minutes? Fine, perfect. The third thing we are trying to implement, after you have made this preliminary assessment, and after you have selected what kind of different regulation tools you are going to use, you have to implement that and you have to learn. Too often, regulation is not about, it's about giving marks. You are doing well, you are not doing well. Very often, the real situation is much more complex. Very often, there may be a lot of problems, for example, in one issue, and an excellent job in another issue, in the same place. And you have to find a way to regulate in a way that guarantees that after that you give the resources to the place that you can to your provider. If something is not going well, you are there not only to give marks, but to help them to do their job better. Inspectors have to be also counselors, have to be helpers. They have to be knowledge movers. They have to bring knowledge and expertise for one place that is running well to another place that is not running so well. That's much more important than to come with a list of checklists to mark V's and X's and give a marks. Regulation is about training organization, service provider to do their work better. That's much more important. I know that there is this idea that among service providers, 20% on the one hand are going to do their job without regulation because they are motivated by ethics. They want to do it. At the other end of the Gauss distribution, there is a 20% that you need to regulate very strongly because they want to make money and don't care about the well-being of the people they serve. And in the big middle, there is a 60%. A regulation that talk only about compliance will move the 60% to the bad end. Okay, people that's the way the people are talking to us. They are talking about rules and regulation. We are going to what I call to adopt a ritualistic approach. We are going to do what they want us to do, and they don't care about the quality of the services. So a big issue for ministry and for regulators is to guarantee that the 60% in the middle will move to the good end. And that's possible if you do that. But you have to remember that still there are some providers that you have to be there and tell them you are not doing your job. So that's why I want to finish with this aphorism by the former President of the United States. Speak softly, and carry a big stick. So speak softly to the 80%, but carry a big stick. We need it for the bad provider. Thank you for your, and I hope that Google Translate have done a good job and think that too. Thank you.
Děkuju za ten příspěvek. Myslím, že pro všechny bude asi hodně podnětný se nad plnou věcma zamyslet. A já mám teda samozřejmě otázek milion, ale vybral bych jenom jednu, jestli můžu poprosit. Bylo by možné nám říct, nebo na nějakém praktickém příkladě předvíst nebo popsat právě ten způsob toho měření třeba těch výstupů, toho, co se s tím klientem stalo, jaký došlo změně. Jo? Protože to je samozřejmě jako velká otázka pro nás, protože my jsme teď spíš, si dovolím to tak interpretovat v té fázi nebo v tom přístupu manažerským než v tom profesionálním. A bylo by fajn, kdybychom se mohli posunout někam dál, ale pro představu, jakým způsobem se to dá měřit. Měří se to jako kontinuálně online, měří se to jednou za rok nebo za nějaký jiný období. Měří si to každý poskytovatel nebo každá sociální služba sama, nebo to měří někdo na ministerstvu externě. Děkuji.
Again, my advice to you, if I may, is not to choose one of the approaches, but to know that there are two approaches to be followed. In terms of what you ask about that, you asked for an example. I'll try to give an example. We have centers for families with domestic violence. When people are seeking for help because there is domestic violence inside the family, and they are with us for, I think, 20 years. And the idea was quite simple in the beginning. There is a problem in the family. People face violence between the husband and the wife, in both directions, by the way. And the belief was quite simple. We bring people to talk with them, and the very fact that people are going to talk with them is going to help them to solve the problem. Basic social work. And people there were quite frustrated because it was not working so well. And so we tried to bring what we have done in the outcome initiative. We brought together a group of practitioners, inspectors, and managers, what we call a multi-level learning team, from the top ministry level to the inspection level to the field level, set together, and for the first time, define the outcomes they want to achieve in those centers. Okay? This is not a decision made by the top ministry. This is left to the learning team, where everyone has the same voice. Field workers, case workers, inspectors. We brought in academicians to tell them what the literature is telling about this time, what works and what doesn't work, what is the evidence in terms of research. And people for the first time define what they want to achieve. And they found out it was not clear at all. Some of them want to save marriage. Some of them want to protect the woman. Some of them wanted to find a way to go on with a lower level of violence and so on. So people were able to set for the first time what the outcomes they want to achieve. And then discover that the same place may have different outcomes according to the family. Again, every family is a full word. So every family has a different set of objectives to achieve. And after it was accepted in the learning team, it was adopted by the ministry. Not the other one. Start from the bottom to the top. It was adopted, and the different outcomes that were mentioned were used in a more systematic administrative database, computerized data work and so on. But every social worker still has the right, at the field level, at the street level, to make the decision together with the family what is the outcome they want to achieve. So, at the very end, there is a measurement, a systematic, long-term measurement. But the very strength of the system is not that somebody from the outside is guaranteeing that the money of the public is used in a good way. The very strength of the system is that caseworkers at the field who want to do good. They want to achieve the outcome they have defined. They are feeling that they are able to do that. And this is much more effective than any kind of external inspection in most of the way, again, most of the cases. So my advice to you is instead of putting very sophisticated inspection system from the outside, train people, train caseworkers, train managers in the field to be able to follow the work they do in a more systematic way. It's a long process. It requires a lot of resources. On the long term, it is the cheapest way to achieve inspection, to my knowledge.
Omlouvám, tak z pozice ředitele, tak si takhle jakoby vezmu ještě jednu otázku, která by mě pak v noci trápila. Mě by zajímalo, jestli, nebo kolik vlastně máte těch inspektorů na ministerstvu a kolik zhruba je sociálních služeb v Izraeli. A pak jenom poslední spíš dovětek. Byl bych moc rád, kdybychom zase navázali spolupráci, protože myslím, že ten přístup a zkušenosti by byly určitě, minimálně by u nás mohly otevřít jako širokou diskuzi na téma, jak řídit sociální služby. Děkuji.
Okay, some numbers. The Israeli population is about 8.6 million. Not far from yours. It's about the same scale. Okay. In the field of personal social service, field including everything, we have about 85,000 workers. About 15,000 of them are social workers. We have, for all this system, we have about 250 inspectors in the field. 250, that's the number. It's not enough. If you rely on inspectors to guarantee the quality of the social work done in Israel, this is not enough at all. And those guys are overwhelmed in any sense. Okay? Those are overloaded inspectors regulating the work of overloaded caseworkers. Everybody is overloaded in this subject. So basically, we are inside of it. We have the same in the past, and maybe until now we have the same dilemma: what to do in that situation. And some people are adopting the managerial approach. There is not enough caseworkers, so guarantees that they work more effectively with very clear checklists and procedures and so on. Do that part of the job. And some of them say there is no way, you have to leave professional discretion intact and do not interfere there. And as always, very often in life, the role of the ministry and the role of leaders of the social service system is to find the right middle, to use the big stick when it is needed, and to use the soft voice when it is more effective. And of course, I will be more than happy to share any experience we have with your ministry. Thank you.